Hi everyone, it's John. Last weekend I put out I guess the weekend before last now, I put out an invitation to ask me any kinds of questions you might have for me. I think in February this year I ended up passing 1,000 subscribers on my channel. This isn't to celebrate any subscriber number. It's been over 7.5 years that I've had this channel up and going, and I've never put out an invitation or a call to ask any personal questions about me. Whenever anyone has done it in the past, I've usually just sort of ignored them, to be honest. But there seems to be some amount of interest, and actually, I got about 5 times as many questions as I would have expected. I was frankly quite, expecting maybe 2 or 3 questions, and it looks like I got probably more like 15. So, thank you. I appreciate it. Um, Let me just jump right in and start answering stuff. I'm going to apologize in advance for mispronouncing any names, especially the names of authors, especially with one person's question, but also subscriber names. So I'm going to try to address everyone, and I'll do my best. Peg from the History Shelf, who I've mentioned several times on this channel, one of my very good friends whose contact information and channel information I'll leave below. She's at the History Shelf, by the way. Peg asks, Hi John, where's the most exotic place you've ever traveled to? Also, if you could live anywhere on Earth, where would you choose and why? So, the most exotic place I've ever traveled to would probably be as someone who's never left the United States. Not even the continental United States. Probably Portland, Oregon, maybe, with a layover in Salt Lake City. And that's not a joke. That's my actual real answer. There's not much exotic traveling going on over here, unfortunately. If I could live anywhere on Earth, it would depend on what my choice would be based on. Texas is a little warm for me, so somewhere in the Pacific Northwest would be great. Somewhere in the Pacific Northeast would also be wonderful. Also because of, I think, their just political climate might be a bit more amenable to my own. But for culture, maybe if I had all the money in the world, New York City, London, Paris, Naples, Rome, Chicago, big cultural metropolises where there was tons of bookstores, museums, symphony orchestras, operas to go to, things like that. Things that would keep us busy for months and years. The next, I didn't copy and paste your name in here, Michał. Michał, who is a fan of mine from, probably the first few months of my channel, asked me a question. He says, "Hi, I'm a fan from Poland, from Warsaw, Poland. Do you feel drawn to Eastern European authors? If so, which authors are your favorite? And thank you for the great work that you're doing." Well, thank you, Michał. I appreciate it. So, of course, immediately, I actually didn't even think about the broad swath of Polish authors the broad swath of Eastern European authors that I could have talked about. I actually just wanted to consider the Polish ones. And of course, the first one that pops out to me would be the great Polish writer that wrote in English, Joseph Conrad. But I've also read Stanislaw Lem, the guy who wrote Polaris. I many years ago, in the first couple of years of my channel, I reviewed a book called The Captive Mind by Czesław Miłosz, who wrote a book about the way 4 different slightly fictionalized writers reacted to living in a totalitarian, despotic government and how that affects their writing and their art. I have always been a fan, and I wish I could read her in Polish. Unfortunately, I can't. But Wisława Szymborska has been blessed with, and especially, I mean, if my sense is any indication, an extremely gifted set of English language translators. I've always been blown away, even by the translations of her poetry, which almost never happens. Bruno Schultz, the Street of Crocodiles, is it? Again, reviewed it 6 or 7 years ago on my channel. Also read Pornografia by Witold Gombrowicz, which I also reviewed. Again, I've reviewed most of these things. Richard Kapuscinski's travel writing. I've reviewed at least one of his books. I reviewed, I think it was Travels with Herodotus, which is where he basically follows Herodotus in his own footsteps and goes where he went and just writes about it beautifully. But he wrote many, many other books, none of which of the others I've gotten around to reading yet. Isaac Singer, who writes in this sort of amazing, like, he imports his Jewish background, obviously, Jewish mythology. It's very much. I'm not too familiar with Jewish literature, but Isaac Bashevis Singer was kind of a revelation when I first read him. Unlike any other fiction writer I've really ever known. And I guess the last one, at least on a cursory inspection of of the authors I've read over the past several years, is Jerzy Kosinski, who wrote Being There, of course, and the novel I reviewed on my channel, which is The Painted Birds, which, for whatever reason, really brought the crazies out in the comment section. If you want to go read a really crazy comment section, in my sometimes not so charitable comments, you can go look at that review. Andy McKinney, hi Andy, says, hello John, I'd like to know if you went to university, and if so, what you studied. You are obviously a smart guy. Your check is in the mail, Andy. And do you have a job outside of YouTube? I love the slight insinuation there that I might actually be making money off of these videos. I don't know if you intended that, Andy, but I'm charmed that thought would even cross your mind. Yes, I did go to school. I majored in physics and philosophy and got a degree in both. And for about 3 years of my undergraduate education, thought that I wanted to pursue a graduate degree. I was leaning more towards the humanities than I was physics, but I was still open-minded. And my last year, which is what here in the United States we would call your senior year, I realized if I don't go to graduate school, then I can read whatever the hell I want to, and no one can tell me what to read. And since I'm lucky enough intellectually to have pretty much just as good a grasp on the sciences and mathematics as I do history and English and other social sciences, I knew that I would be okay career-wise without going to graduate school, and that I would be able to get a job and support myself, do anything I needed to live. So there was no pressing, urgent need to go to graduate school for that reason. So I just figured, for the next 5 years, I can actually pursue a line of reading that is my own and wasn't handed down to me on a list of syllabi. Not that I have anything against syllabi-based reading, but that's my university story. Do you have a job outside of YouTube? Yes, I make no money off of these videos, as you can tell by my number of subscribers and view counts. I mean, I think if you go back to the beginning of my channel, I might have made like I think $6 or $7 off of all of my videos in the past 7.5 years. So yeah, that's not going to do it for rent. I do some work as a psychometrician. If you're not familiar with what psychometrics is, it's kind of like, think of if statistics had a baby with psychology. It's sort of like applying statistical methods to psychological data. And I also tutor college students in everything from college algebra, which they should have learned in 9th grade, to calculus, to physics, chemistry, composition, history, psychology, sociology, you name it. The only things I don't do are economics, anything to do with finance, foreign languages, and computers, or computer science. Anything else I'm up for. /Gee. Slash asks, hello, was very fascinated by your previous anecdote about Jacques Barzun. Which of his books would you recommend for someone coming to his work for the first time? So that depends on what your interests might be, Slash. I think you've probably inevitably heard of people talk about From Dawn to Decadence, which is a book that's been all over YouTube. And was written, interestingly enough, I may have told this story in my in a previous video where I mentioned him. He wrote that book over a period of a year to year and a half when he was moving from, I think it was Columbia University, to San Antonio. So he wrote this book well before I met him, but he told me about writing it. And if he didn't seem like much of an exaggerator. So to believe him, he wrote about 90% of that book with almost none of his library accessible to him because it was all being moved. It was all in boxes. And remember, this was when he was well past 90. So he had the kind of mind where he could just write about books for 700-800 pages, take you through the history of all kinds of ideas as presented in the great books when he was well past 90. And that's why he lived to be 104, and like I said in the other video, was cogent up until the end. So, From Dawn to Decadence is a great introduction. You might also be interested in a book called, excuse me, The Jacques Barzun Reader, which is a collection of his shorter work, and it's a broader swath of his stuff from the very beginning. He started writing back in the 30s, all the way through, it might even have stuff past From Dawn to Decadence. So it's a broad chronological sort of look at him. There's a book he wrote in the mid 40s, which Liberty Fund puts out, the company Liberty Fund. It's called Teacher in America. It is, I have looked at it since he's passed away, and it reads a bit like it was written by a very privileged white man in the 1940s, which it was. So today, 75 years later, 80, years later, it can read a bit cringy because there's some, you know, uh, some sexism in it. There's some very weird assumptions about women's place in the university, and just very old-fashioned stuff. I mean, it's a fascinating book. I have it in my long-term to-be-read pile, like thoroughly cover to cover to be read. I haven't done that yet, but I've looked at it. And one other thing, if you have a very, very specific interest, I'll mention it just in case. He wrote, he had a lifelong interest in the music and the musicology of the 19th century composer Hector Berlioz. And he wrote maybe the definitive biography of Berlioz, I think in the 50s. It's a 2-volume biography. And I think it's tough to get your hands on, but if you are interested in his music or the music scene of, mid 19th century France, it was something that he was completely and totally familiar with. And again, have not read it cover to cover, but am somewhat passingly familiar with it. Is worth finding, even if you have to pay a little bit of money for it. Unfortunately, I've only been able to find it for 3 digits, which is not something I'm going to pay for a book these days when I have hundreds of unread books. But if you can find it for a more regular price, that might be something to consider if you're interested in that period of music. Okay, so here's my first name I think I'm going to have a tough time with. Thienan. Thienan. Are there any particular natural science or math books you've enjoyed and or would greatly recommend, and do those subjects not really find their way onto your reading list as much of this as the humanities and sciences? Well, as I told you earlier, I majored in physics and read lots and lots of physics books in school. Also took lots of chemistry and lots of math, as you would imagine, as you probably need to understand physics requires a lot of math. I don't do math and science books because, for me, many math and science books, and you might have to have some kind of familiarity with math and science on a broad basis to understand what I'm talking about. But I'll explain my problem with them. Mainstream publishers these days, you get something along 2 extremes. You get either a book about black holes and string theory, which is meant for 8th graders. I mean, literally presented to maybe a high school science educated population. And then you will have the extremely scholarly book that only people with, graduate degrees in math and physics can understand. And there's that space in the middle occupied by the fairly intelligent person who has, a solid background in science and doesn't need to have explained to them what a black hole is or what an ion is or what a molecule is. That space in publishing seems to be getting smaller and smaller. And it's mostly because I think the level of scientific literacy in the United States is probably decreasing. Sometimes I'll just pick up a book at a a retail bookstore on science, and they'll spend 5 or 10 pages explaining to you what evolution is, or what just some very fundamental concept, and it's just like, yeah, I paid attention in class. I mean, let's move along here. I guess I'm just lucky to be that frustrated because not everyone has that background, and I'm very, very lucky to have been, like I said, pretty much equally exposed to both halves of the science and the humanities too. Um, I've been told it's kind of a rare thing that people are equally attracted to both. The reason why I don't talk about them on my channel is because when they're too easy, I get frustrated and I won't finish them, and I refuse to review a book that I have not finished on this channel. Every single book I review, I've read from cover to cover, page to page, have not skimmed. I've read every word. And obviously the super, super advanced stuff, I don't have the background to understand. So there are times I have Theanin, I have folders in this channel of topics on books I review. And certainly the major topics, as you can probably tell, like fiction, history. I think there's one called science. It's a relatively small folder. It might only have 10, 15, 20 reviews in it. But feel free to go through there and look and see if you find anything you like. Granted, a lot of it would be on the history of science, sort of maybe a humanities take on science. But and if you're interested in that, by the way, I have 3 books I want to show you. So again, these all have as their subject some aspect of science, but all through the lens of looking back on it as a historical pursuit. So just really, really quick, this is the beginnings of science, the European scientific tradition in philosophical, religious, and institutional. Let me just read it to you. I can't, looking at the webcam. The European scientific tradition in philosophical, religious, and institutional context, prehistory to AD 1450. This is by an amazing scholar at University of Wisconsin at Madison by the name of David Lindbergh. His specialty is the medieval and Renaissance history of science, and he's a fascinating writer. So, if that floats your boat. Another great writer, no longer with us, but he was, I'm sure Sean Standfast might know who this is. I would be amazed if he didn't. This is Roy Porter, The Greatest Benefit to Mankind. And this is subtitled A Medical History of Humanity. And it is an 800-page history of clinical science, public medicine, the study and history of physiological developments of what we know about the body. And I mean, going back to antiquity, the Greeks and the Romans, all the way up through, the discovery of anesthesia. A thick thing, a time investment, but really one of those books that hits that sweet middle spot. Doesn't get overly technical and is not meant for a 12-year-old either. So definitely appreciate that. And along the same lines, very much, even though this is actually from a university press, it's from University of Chicago. This is The Eye of the Lynx. Galileo, His Friends, and the Beginnings of Modern Natural History. Just a really, really beautiful book on this thick, sort of lush paper. If any of those sound interesting or you might want a review of any of those, let me know. And I would be glad to eventually put one up. Sharon Goforth from the channel Sharon Goforth has a question. Hi, John. I'd like to know if you play any musical instruments, and if so, which ones, and have you ever played professionally? Professionally, never. However, From 6th grade all the way through university, I played the cello in my high school, middle school orchestras, and then in my university orchestra. And I taught myself how to play the piano as well. I went up to my private cello teacher one day and I said, "Can you show me where middle C is? Can you play a C chord for me? And can you explain the difference between the white keys and the black keys?" He said the white keys are the natural keys, and the black keys are the sharps and the flats. And it was like, "Oh, just like on a cello." And he said, "Yep." And I said, "Okay." And I went home and I annoyed my parents for what I'm sure was 3 or 4 hours a day for month after month, and never took any lessons. So I am absolutely certain that my fingerings on the piano were all wrong. But I learned to play, some stuff I was interested in, the slower movements of Mozart piano sonatas and stuff like that. Some Bach symphonias. Sean Standfast. Hi, Sean. Sean says, "Hi, John. I have 2 questions. Describe your collection of books in the sense of any specific introductions or, specific concentrations of topics or interests. And do you have a university background? What did you study? And do you work in that field? If not, why? If you've answered these questions before, my apologies as I've missed them." I don't think I have answered them in other videos, but I did answer them earlier in this one. As to whether I work in that field, I have taught as a math and physics teacher. That was about a dozen years ago. I use my degrees now because I tutor in some of the subjects that I have degrees in, but as far as formally using them for someone else, like am I solving equations or doing physics for some company or something? No. I'm just helping to teach, helping to pass it on to other students. So question 1 is something I did not answer. Describe your collection of books in the sense of concentrations. Again, I think, Sean, I don't know if you've ever noticed, there is, and I've been really, really bad about keeping this updated. I need to go back and do it. There's a list of playlists on my channel, which collects almost all of my videos into categories. So I have things like science, which, like I said, was pretty small, history, literature, which is almost all what people would consider classics or classic adjacent, everything from Homer to 20th century stuff. Sociology, literary criticism, philosophy. I have a bit of philosophy, and then I have a topic for essays. I have another topic called a veritable Salmagundi, which is just if I didn't have a folder for it, I just threw it in there because it was just a sort of like a hodgepodge potpourri of things. But that's how they're collected on my channel. My library itself, I used to have an actual library in my house when I lived in San Antonio. Here, I don't have a room for that, so a lot of my books had to just be packed up, and they are either up against a wall in my living room, which is adjacent to the room I am now, or they're in my shed. Where they are, I only have probably, I would say maybe 600 to 800 books unpacked and out on bookshelves. I had to give probably 15 or 20 bookshelves away because I simply didn't have a room for it here. They also used to be organized by topic. So say I would have history, and then within that topic by author's last name, philosophy, everyone within their last name, etc. I know a lot of people do it by subject. They'll have all their books of existentialism here and all their, ancient Greek stuff here. I always do it by author's last name. because otherwise, I tend to think that, oh, was this book about Aristotle and my history ancient Greek or my philosophy ancient Greek? But, A is much easier to remember than having to check in both places. All right, next question. Gabriel Ventura asks, hey, John, would you ever see yourself giving up all these solid books? You've got to tell me more what you mean by solid books, and just try fantasy. You're great at explaining what a book's about. I have been a sub ever since I found the review for Boethius's book, The Consolation of Philosophy. A painful book. Yeah, Gabriel, it really, really is. That's really insightful of you to say, actually, and I completely agree. It's very painful. The review for which I still watch from time to time. Thank you. I used to try to talk myself into the fact that these reviews were just a record of my own reading, but every time I hear comments like that, it reminds me that there's every once in a while someone who gets something out of these reviews, who gleans an insight or something, and it was thanks to me, which is really, really just like a genuine pleasure to know. If that ever happened, I mean, people leave comments like that sometimes, but that really makes my day when that happens. So if you ever really, really want to just put a smile on my face, leave a comment like that in one of my videos, and I'll be sure to reply. I was just asking about reviewing books like The Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, The Witcher. Never even heard of The Witcher. Heard of the other two, though. Could increase your channel by 10 times. I'm guessing he means subscribers or views. Yeah, I mean, it might. There's certainly something to be said for reviewing more popular books and therefore making your channel more popular. However, I've tried reading fantasy and science fiction, and it just doesn't do much for me, with very rare exceptions. I just told a good friend of mine who was a self-proclaimed science fiction fan about Ursula Le Guin. So I got to introduce him to a whole new world of several worlds, I guess, of stuff he's going to enjoy for many years to come. But her Left Hand of Darkness is something I would totally review on this channel. And some of her other stuff too, but most, and Sean, or anyone else, if you're watching, science fiction writers get this, and you certainly know this because I think you enjoy it. They get this reputation for being childish, but I know you've read Ursula Le Guin. I don't think you've ever mentioned her on your channel, but I just know you have. She's a sophisticated writer. I don't know if you like her, but if you like her and you know more writers like that who treat science fiction in a really sophisticated, adult, thought-provoking way, share some names with me in the comments section, Sean, or anyone else who takes their interest in science fiction really seriously. And I would love to introduce myself to some names I could really cotton onto and grow into and learn more about. But for whatever reason, the recommendations I've always come across in the past have done little for me. And I don't want to come on this channel and talk about books I'm lukewarm about. I review everything I read, and I'm certainly not excited about everything I read, but I thought I would be when I started it. And it's usually the case that with science fiction, I look at it and I'm like, if I read this, I'm not even anticipating on enjoying which is probably a fault of mine. It's a character flaw. I need to widen my horizons. Um, but if you have any good recommendations, Sean or anyone else, please let me know. And by the way, that doesn't just go for um, science fiction. It goes for anything else that you may not happen to see reviewed on a regular basis on this channel. I only talk about maybe, what, depending on how you count, 6, 8, 10 different kinds of genres of books. I'm a very narrow reader, which is funny because people look at my library and they tell me, you read everything. I'm like, no, not even close. I read a tiny, tiny fraction of topics. I mean, philosophy, history, literature, sociology, literary criticism. I mean, that is, you look at the Dewey Decimal System, that is an exceedingly small fraction of what's out there. But I'm interested in learning more, so leave recommendations below. All right, 36 minutes. Let's see if we can wrap this up. Trip, the infamous commenter who who doesn't have his own channel, but if you do have your own channel, you'll probably recognize his name. He leaves comments on many, many different channels all over YouTube. He wrapped it up with a series of 5 questions for me. So here they are. You asked me to post questions here. Number 1, what field of physics interests you most and why? Maybe not surprisingly, I kind of have started looking at science in historical sense and the developments of it. One of my most interesting periods of science to study is right at the tail end of the 19th century and the first 10 to 20 years of the 20th in physics, when we discovered the black body problem and the problem of radiation, and the slow discovery of quantum mechanics, and this discovery of a world that is totally bizarre, but as we find more and more out about it, also that bizarreness accords with our understanding of Newtonian mechanics. I've always found that really interesting. What else? I love physics at the extremes. I love really big physics, like theoretical cosmology, Big Bang. A lot of that is very speculative and is not exactly what you would call science, but it's still fascinating to learn and think about. And I love physics at the very small. Like I said, quantum mechanics, string theory, all of that. Finding books like going back to that earlier conversation, that are smartly trying to present string theory is tough, but there are a few out there. Number 2, do you enjoy genre fiction, and if so, which ones? Probably not in the sense of, mystery, thriller, science fiction, romance. Most of the fiction I read on the channel. If you look up the fiction file in the history of my reviews, what's the word I'm looking for? Where you can backlog all of your videos. They are, it's mostly older stuff. Classics. I've reviewed newer things that haven't really entered a canon of any kind, but still have a really good critical reputation, and very well might enter a canon. That's not why I read them, but anything that's usually considered genre fiction is usually too new for me to want to read. I'm a very slow, methodical reader, and I want to try to make sure that everything I read is going to have a chance of at least have a chance of making sure that the investment of time I put into it was worth it. Um, Other people's opinions, the opinions of dead white guys, uh, is not a certainty that I'll like something. But I found that if other people tend to like it, and other people whose opinions and writing I respect tend to like it, I usually, and maybe it's just a state of mind thing going into it with a perspective of I'm going to enjoy this, mind over matter, but that tends to help me. Number 3, which historical periods fascinate you the most? I don't know if you mean fiction there, but in case you don't, history, just pure history-wise, the medieval and Renaissance periods. I love ancient Rome and Greece too. Um, some stuff I've always wanted to learn more about is my knowledge of ancient Egypt is woefully bad, and I've also wanted to dig in more to Mayan culture, um, Olmec culture, um, the Andean cultures, Incan stuff. I know nothing about that either. Um, but the more I hear, the more I'm fascinated. So those. What is your relationship? Number 4. What's your relationship with spirituality or religion? I am a non-spiritual atheist. Um, and to be honest with you, I don't even really know what spirituality means. Uh, I'm not trying to say that to be sarcastic, but I've never heard a good definition of it. Um, some people will say, you know, something about a soul or something. I see no evidence that people have souls. So, if you have an idea of what spirituality might mean when people say it, let me know. Number 5, when looking at your reading selection, what biases and or preferences do you notice? Ooh, I hadn't noticed this question before for some reason. For example, towards a specific genre, writing style, setting. Yeah. So I kind of answered a couple of those earlier as far as topics that I read and genres that I read. Go look at the sort of playlists. That's the word I was looking for earlier, playlists. And those will show you where about 90 to 95% of what I read fits in. Writing styles, novels, essays, drama. Setting, and a lot of what I read, quite frankly, is European white males, and that's probably something I should try to work on a little bit, but it just happens to be a lot of the stuff that's in my library. I didn't mean for it to be that way, but I'm also not going to fret over it either. It's when I was building my library, I didn't really consider the color of the skin or the sex or gender of the people who wrote the books that I was interested in. I bought them because of the titles of the books, not because of who wrote them. So, and it just so happens to be that that women and and a lot of other groups were systematically marginalized from a lot of the the periods of stuff that I like to read, which is like take science for example. Look at what happened to Marie Curie. She had to fight tooth and nail to have her work recognized. But that's a whole nother video, or it may not even belong on this channel, but hopefully it goes some way in addressing your question, Trip. So at 45 minutes, I think I will end it there. And Please let me know what you think, and I will be back later with a book review.